Welcome to Our Village Circle, a podcast centered around authentic sharing, honest storytelling, and elevating the voices of parents and professionals alike to demystify the realities of new parenthood. We understand on a visceral level that with the joy of your new human also comes every other emotion under the sun. We want you to feel seen, heard, known, and held in this life-altering stage. We wholeheartedly believe that everyone's story has something powerful to offer others as they navigate their own journey. Hi everyone, and welcome back. I'm your host, Jaely Turner, and today's episode is going to be just me, actually. I'm currently sitting in my home. I'm pregnant with our second baby, and I realized that I haven't gotten my own birth story out there. I've been sitting and listening to everyone else's amazing stories. I've shared tidbits of my birth story here and there on social media and with my clients and whatnot, but I don't really have a comprehensive documentation of it anywhere. And before I go into a second birth experience, I think it's important for me to tell the first one. So my first pregnancy was really wonderful, actually, as far as how I felt. Of course, I had a little bit of nausea in the beginning, but I never threw up. I was able to manage it pretty well with just eating and breathing and yoga and all of that. And it's really interesting because for the longest time, I had a fear of getting pregnant because I swore that I was going to be one of those women who was just sick all the time. I had never responded well to hormonal birth control. And from what I understood, birth control tricked your body into thinking that you were pregnant. So I assumed that since birth control made me vomit a lot, that pregnancy would make me vomit a lot. And that fear actually made me afraid of being pregnant. And it was because I was terrified of how pregnancy would feel, how my body would handle pregnancy. I had tiny hips, so I was sure that I was just going to have a cesarean because the baby wouldn't fit through my hips. I was so afraid of giving birth and all of the pain associated with that. I was sure that I would go into the hospital and get my epidural immediately. That was what I grew up hearing from my mom, who was not allowed to get an epidural when she had her babies. She tried to get one and didn't. But I remember always hearing my mom say, "Oh, get the epidural right away for a pain-free childbirth." So I just always thought that I was one of those people who was going to go in and get the drugs, not even a question. And I was surprised when, from the second I found out I was pregnant, I just knew that my body would do it. My body would build this baby, it would carry it, it would birth my baby, and it's just what my body knew how to do. And it was just this deep knowing that I felt. And it caught me by surprise because I had been carrying this fear around forever. So I moved through my pregnancy and I was surprised that this desire kept bubbling up to have a low intervention, unmedicated childbirth. And this desire came up pretty early, and I started thinking about the birth very early, from probably about 6 to 9 weeks onward. And I started asking questions at my OB's office. At the time, we were with an insurance provider that housed all of their doctors in one building, and you didn't really get much of a choice of which doctor you saw or what sort of care you received. And I was in the obstetric model of care. At the time, I'd been watching a lot of Call the Midwife, so in my brain, I had this totally different idea of what my pregnancy care would be. I really desired that more personalized experience, that more holistic approach of, okay, you're pregnant. How is this affecting you emotionally? How is this affecting your health? How can you manage your diet, your lifestyle to support your pregnancy? And what I got from the very first appointment was, okay, let's do an ultrasound. Let's do a pap smear. And got any questions? No? Okay, bye. And I think it was my 11-week appointment. I started asking questions about the birth, about which hospital I'd be in, And when I expressed my desire for an unmedicated birth, the question was immediately dodged. And I got the feeling right away that this wasn't really going to be the right care environment for me, but I felt stuck because this was what our insurance covered. So I went through my whole pregnancy with that kind of silent butting of heads, if you will, just not really ever feeling like I could trust my care provider, that my care provider was supportive of my wishes. And then it was a team of 40 doctors. So I never even knew which doctor would be present at the birth of my baby. And that wasn't really what I wanted. I knew that I needed an environment where I could trust everyone around me and I had a rapport with them. So I felt this isn't really what I want, but I don't really know what to do because this is what we've got. But it was an odd feeling, just not feeling like that care was the right fit for me. And I had a lot of fears about coming off as spoiled or coming off as prissy, when on paper the care was perfectly adequate. They were making sure that I was healthy. They were making sure that my baby was healthy, but that was about as far as it went, and I just desired something more. Anyway, we moved through my pregnancy and I was mildly sick. Around 10 weeks, I started getting really severe tailbone pain, which in hindsight, now going through my second pregnancy and suffering from symphysis pubis dysfunction, I suspect I had the first time too. So symphysis pubis dysfunction is when your body produces an excess of relaxin, which is one of the pregnancy hormones that allows your pelvis to be malleable when you are birthing your baby. It allows the bones and ligaments to become looser, to let the baby have a little more space to grow. It's what makes your feet a little bigger. Sometimes women go up an entire shoe size after having a baby, or they'll find that their band size on their bra grows an extra inch or two because their rib cage has literally expanded. So my body produces an excess of this relaxin hormone, which has caused my pelvis, my pubic bone, to prematurely spread apart. It's something that can be incredibly uncomfortable and really requires management from a physical therapist and a chiropractor, which I didn't have access to the first time that I was pregnant. So I just managed, but it was incredibly uncomfortable, incredibly painful. But that was really my only complaint with I was big. I started showing at 8 weeks. People were asking me really early on if it was twins. And we even suspected twins because they do run really heavily in my family. And we were surprised when we learned that it was only one. But things really came to a head with my care provider when we went to my 20-week scan. And I was so excited, of course nervous, but mostly excited for this day because it was the big ultrasound. We would really get to see our baby. We would get to learn a lot about how my body was carrying my baby, and we would get to answer all the questions. What are we looking at? Is that his kidneys? Is everything healthy? How is it functioning? Where's my placenta located? And for me, as someone who's really inquisitive about my body, it was an exciting thing for me to be able to learn all this information. So then when we walked into the ultrasound office, and it was this cold room with no screen, and the ultrasound tech told us straight away that they would not be answering any questions and I would not be able to see the screen. It was so disappointing to me. It was so scary. I felt completely dehumanized, and I spent the entire scan just feeling like I wanted to cry because all I wanted to do was see my baby. I had been waiting for 4 months, and of course, like, women wait 9 months and eventually we'll get to see the baby in person, but I had just been so excited for this day, and then to really not even feel like I was a part of it was really an awful feeling for me. The ultrasound tech could tell that I was upset, so then at the end she was like, "Oh, do you want to see?" And I said, "Yes, of course I do." And she turned the screen around for about a minute and was like, "There, are you happy now?" And it was just a really negative and heartbreaking experience. Everyone had told me that the 20-week scan was super exciting and they got to look at the baby. So it was surprising, it was disappointing. I felt really uncared for, and it was just a big disappointment. And there were certain things I wanted to know that if I wanted to know them, I would ask my doctor, and my doctor, instead of just answering the question, she started questioning my intentions behind wanting to know things about my own body. And it shouldn't matter why I want to know things about my own body. If I ask my provider a question, they should just answer it. So it just didn't jive with me. The whole experience didn't jive with me. I very often had to pull my own medical records to find out information that I wanted to know. Basic things like, is my placenta in the front or back? I suspected that it was in the front because we had not been feeling the baby kick, but they wouldn't just answer the question. I had to pull up my medical records to find that out. When I had a partial placenta previa, I asked how far my placenta was from my cervix, and they wouldn't answer the question. I had to pull the records from my ultrasound to find out how far my placenta needed to move in order to qualify for a vaginal birth. All of these things, it was just a bunch of extra steps to find out answers to questions that I feel should have just been answered when I asked them. So I really struggled with the lack of transparency from the care I was receiving. And then finally, after this 20-week scan appointment, I looked at my husband and I just said, we are on the open market. So we were getting Obamacare. So we did have a little bit of choice about which insurance provider we could get. We didn't just have to go through the one that my husband's work provided because they didn't provide insurance. So I sat down with my husband, I had a big talk, and just really expressed that when the new year rolled around, I really wanted to get on a different insurance so that I would have the ability to switch care providers, to go and see a midwife and be able to birth in the hospital that I really wanted to. Because I just did not feel like I trusted my care providers. And I just had an inner knowing that lack of trust, that lack of feeling safe would somehow have an impact on my birth. So we waited until the new year rolled around, and we did register for a new insurance provider when open enrollment came, and I was able to make the switch to a midwife in my area. I was 33 weeks pregnant when this happened. So I was pretty far in, and I was pretty nervous about making the switch, but my gut just knew that it was the right decision for me. I really struggled with what other people would think of me making this switch and not just accepting the status quo of what I was receiving. And I felt a lot of shame over not being able to just be grateful that everything was healthy and nothing matters except a healthy baby. I knew that my feeling of safety mattered. My feeling of being able to trust my body and being able to have my questions answered all mattered. I knew that, but I felt self-conscious about it. And I think that partially had to do with the support that I had at the time. I had some shaky friendships that didn't really validate all of that. But despite those feelings, I was able to make those decisions for myself. And when I finally switched, it was night and day. The first appointment was with Heather, actually. You all heard from her in episode 3. She was the home birth midwife. At the time, she was working with this hospital midwife practice that I switched to. And we met her, and I just felt the months and months of fear and stress just melt away. And I did not even realize how much my pregnancy care had been stressing out and how much I had been preparing to fight to get information, and I felt like I was preparing for battle at every prior appointment. And at this first appointment when we met Heather, all of that just melted away, and I wanted to cry at the relief. Even my husband, at this first appointment, we were close to 36 weeks, so we were scheduling an ultrasound to check baby's position, and my husband even felt comfortable speaking up, and he asked the midwife. We had a really bad experience at our 20-week scan, and my wife wasn't allowed to see her baby, and she wasn't able to have any of her questions answered, and it was really devastating. At this ultrasound, can we just make sure we get some time to see our baby and to answer questions and all of that? And she came to the front desk with us when we scheduled that appointment, and she specifically had the receptionist put a note on our chart to please give us a lot of time to see our baby. And I wanted to cry. Like I literally getting teary thinking about it because I was just so grateful that someone finally understood the grief that whole experience had caused. When I had tried to talk to people about it after it happened, most of what I got was, oh, everything's healthy. Don't worry, you'll get to see your baby a lot when he's born. And to me, that wasn't the point. Anyway, so I knew right away that this was the care that I had been looking for. This was the personalization that I had been seeking. And so at the time, at this first appointment, I was 33 weeks. I had another appointment at 35 weeks, and I met another midwife, and she was lovely too. Like, the entire team of midwives was just so different than what I had received. My appointments were longer. They wanted to know what my desires were for the birth, and much of what I wanted was actually their status quo. So I started feeling like, oh, I'm not going to have to fight for what I want here. We're all on the same page. And it was just such a great feeling. And this was something that our previous provider had zero interest in discussing. And actually looked at me like I had two heads when I started trying to have those discussions. I was very tired. And as far as I understood, everything I was experiencing was just, you're really pregnant. And I had no baseline of comparison. And of course, now I do 22 weeks pregnant with my second. I feel very different health-wise than I did the first time. I feel a lot healthier overall. Even though I'm uncomfortable, I feel a lot healthier. And I have more energy and just not how I felt the first time. But it wasn't until 36 weeks that we came in. We had our ultrasound, which was lovely. The ultrasound tech spent so much time with us. They answered all of our questions. My placenta had moved. We got to see our baby. We got lots of pictures. And it was just really a lovely experience that was really healing. And then we went into my appointment. And my first blood pressure reading was high. It was 140/90. And they were a little concerned and they wanted to take it again at the end. And we had my appointment and they started talking about what my birth preferences would be. And they started filling out this sheet. And I started getting the feeling of, oh man, they're preparing for this baby to be born really soon. I don't know. But I was in a little bit of denial. I was like, they'll just send me over to do this thing and it'll be normal and then we'll go home and it'll be fine. Like, we don't need any interventions. And so they took my blood pressure at the end of the appointment and again, it was high. So we went over to the hospital to do a preeclampsia workup and I was sure that it was going to be no thing. We would just go and get this testing done and then we would be sent home and just told that we could wait it out and come back for our next appointment. But that wasn't what happened. I ended up having really unstable blood pressure readings, and it wasn't that it was always high, it just was all over the place. Like 1 second it would be really high, and then the next it would be normal, and then it would be low, and then it would be high at the next reading, and it just wasn't consistent, and that concerned them. So they had me do the whole 24-hour peeing in a jug thing, and they monitored the baby. They put me on labetalol, which was this blood pressure medication, which was supposed to lower my blood pressure. And the midwife came in. She said, we don't know what to do about your blood pressure, and we're going back and forth, and I think you need to mentally prepare to not make it to your due date. And that news was shocking to me, especially a first-time mom to a boy. Everyone had told me, and even when in my childbirth education class, we had been told, don't expect to go into labor before your due date. Don't even expect to go to labor on your due date. Expect to go way past your due date. And so I totally had been making all of my plans based on that. We had just had our baby shower and everything was sitting in the house in boxes. We hadn't unpacked anything. I was planning to be done working at 37 weeks, and then I was going to take those last few weeks to do all of my nesting and take a breastfeeding class and all of that. And I totally expected to be sitting in my house at 41 weeks pregnant, twiddling my thumbs, waiting to go into labor. So this news that this baby would be coming earlier than expected was shocking. And I totally thought that it was an unnecessary intervention and that I would be able to avoid it in some way. I remember when the midwife came in and was like, "You probably gonna be having this baby this week." I looked at her and I was like, "I'm going to have to talk to my doula about my birth preferences." And I felt really defensive, and it felt like what we had just gotten all of this care that we wanted. Like, I'm finally with these care providers so that I could have this low intervention birth, and then I just felt like it was being ripped away from me, and I was such an idiot for changing providers when the outcome was going to be the same. And I really went through the ringer with a lot of emotions over that, and a lot of guilt that I was sitting here concerned about what I wanted instead of being able to just be one of those moms that was like, "Oh, nothing matters and accept the healthy baby and do whatever you want to be." Yeah, I knew that my mental health mattered too. But I also felt really self-conscious about that knowledge, because it's not what you see reflected in society. And it's not what people say to you when you're pregnant or when you've just had a baby. So anyway, we went home from the hospital. We were exhausted, so hungry. I ate a giant burger from Red Robin. And then a whole week following that was this awful back and forth of going in and out of the hospital, monitoring my blood pressure, wondering if this was the day we were going to have our baby. And we finally got sent to an MFM office nearby. And at the time, I was 37 weeks pregnant. We had been in and out of the hospital all week, monitoring my blood pressure. And at this point, it had been unstable for a few weeks. And the concern, of course, was preeclampsia. But after a ton of screening, I had no protein in my urine, no elevated liver enzymes. I'd been on bed rest for a few days at this point. I was taking labetalol to keep my blood pressure under control. And still, in the previous few days before this MFM visit, my blood pressure had been all over the map. So when we got to this MFM visit, the ultrasound tech came in with the wrong chart, opened up his notebook and said, "Okay, so we're having a girl." And Chris and I looked at each other and we were like, "We're pretty sure it's a boy. Do you have something to tell us?" And he realized that he had the wrong chart. He turned around, he went and got our chart, and this is already like a bad impression right away. I was like, these guys don't even have the right chart. What the hell? So anyway, he came in. We got a really detailed ultrasound at this appointment. Like, they had the 3D technology, which we hadn't had at any of our other ultrasounds. And we got to see our baby's face in 3D, and it was really cool. And we did confirm that he was a boy and that his lungs were fully developed and everything was good. And it started becoming clear to me that they weren't really checking on my health. They were checking to see if this baby was ready to be born. And I was, at this point, so tired, so frustrated. I really wanted to go into labor on my own. So after the ultrasound tech left, the MFM walked into the room. And he didn't even look at my chart first. He walked in and asked what was going on with me and why I was there. And I looked at him and I just said, "Listen, I was sent here by my midwife after 2 hospital visits, and I don't even want to be here. So you tell me what's going on." And he looked down at my chart literally for 2 seconds. He looked down long enough to see the words gestational hypertension. He didn't even take my blood pressure. He didn't assess my chart. He didn't assess the ultrasound that I had just had in any sort of detail. And he didn't engage with any conversation with me, even though I had a whole list of questions for him. He just proceeded to say over and over again that ACOG recommends immediate delivery. And every time I asked a question, he interrupted me and he would say, "You are very sick. Your pregnancy is putting your life at risk. ACOG recommends immediate delivery of baby for gestational hypertension at 37 weeks. And I just felt like he wasn't going to solicit any questions. And these were questions such as, what are the risks of waiting until 38 weeks when my bishop's score might be a little bit more favorable to an induction? Is it possible for me to be on really strict bed rest until then? Is there any way that we can manage this for a little bit longer to basically increase the chances of having a smooth birth and not having any sort of emergency cesareans or anything like that. And he just wasn't having it. He asked me when my next midwife appointment was. And I said, it's tomorrow. I have my 37-week visit. And then without further ado, he just turned around and he typed into my chart, patient has stated that she will be meeting with her care provider tomorrow to schedule delivery. And I was furious because that was not what I said. And he straight up lied in my chart, but I was just so exhausted and so mad and so frustrated at this point, and honestly a little afraid to speak up, that I just silently seethed in this room with this doctor. And I was so mad at him, mad at the situation, mad at my midwives, mad at myself for even switching doctors. And I just felt like everything that I had hoped for the end of my pregnancy, for how our transition to parenthood was going to go, just was falling down the drain. And I was just really mad. I was mad that this MFM doctor didn't even check my chart before walking into the room or give it more than a moment's consideration during the appointment. I was mad that he didn't even take my blood pressure to see where it had stood that day. I was mad that he didn't listen to me. He didn't solicit any questions, didn't meet me where I was at whatsoever. And I was furious that he lied on my chart. I did point out that he hadn't even looked at my chart, my health history, my pregnancy. I pointed out that he hadn't even checked my blood pressure or any of my vitals. I pointed out that he was referring to a document rather than the person in the room. I pointed out that I still had the right to informed consent. And at this point, I was so worked up, and he just smugly wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm while I was fuming, and it was high. Of course my blood pressure was high. I was pissed. I was worked up. Anyway, after all of this stuff with our OB, I forgot to point out that we didn't even get to hear our son's heartbeat at a doctor's visit until I was 20 weeks pregnant. She just refused to put the Doppler on my belly. And then we had this 20-week scan where I wasn't even allowed to look at the screen. I had been questioned about my intentions behind every question that I asked about my own pregnancy. And then I had finally become brave enough to make this switch to a midwife so late in my pregnancy. And that was a huge risk, but it felt like the right decision for me. Just being an inquisitive woman with, at the time, healthy, low-risk pregnancy who wanted an unmedicated hospital birth. And I had been really excited that their status quo in their practices matched my preferences for my pregnancy and birth, and that I no longer felt like I was preparing to fight for simple information at every appointment. And I finally felt like I was able to take an active role in the decision-making process of my own care. I was proud of myself because I had painstakingly advocated for myself my entire pregnancy. And after all of that, here I was back in the same position that I started, and it was just devastating. Oh, and by the way, we were charged $500 for that MFM appointment. So after we left the office, I got into my car and I was just fuming about how we had been treated, and I felt so powerless. I felt like my hands were tied. I felt like all of my hard work advocating for the care that was right for my family had just completely flown out the window. And I felt like I was fighting a losing battle that I had no control over. So we're driving home, and less than 5 minutes later, as I was still ranting to my incredible husband about what had just happened, my phone rang, and it was the receptionist at my midwife's appointment. And she wanted to know if I was able to reschedule my 3 p.m. appointment the next day to 7 a.m. And of course, I was so depleted at this point. I asked her if this was because they were planning to schedule an induction for the next day. And she just paused and she said, yes. And this poor receptionist, I just burst into tears on the phone. Like, poor lady. And she managed it. She was like, I'm so sorry. I know this is not what you want. I just, at this point, was really starting to concede. But I was scared. We had nothing ready. My baby shower had been just a few days before, Everything was still in boxes. It was all over our living room. Our home was a disaster. I had planned to clean in those last few weeks of my pregnancy. And just the day before, when we were preparing for more monitoring at the hospital, my husband had gone through this mini meltdown about how to position the bassinet for a newborn. It was cute. We thought we might end up having the baby the day before because we were back in the hospital, and he's just sitting there with the bassinet, and there's this incline option on the bassinet. What the heck is that for? And then he just broke down and was like, how am I supposed to be ready to be a dad if I can't even figure out a bassinet? So we both at this point were really scared, really stressed, and we weren't emotionally ready. We thought we had a lot more time. And I hadn't yet had that moment that many pregnant women or postpartum women talk about, where you've done all you can and you're over being pregnant and you are ready for the baby to come. And you're like, yeah, this baby can come any second now. I'm done being pregnant. I'm ready for this baby. Come on, let's go into labor. Like, I never got that. And as frustrating as so many pregnant women feel about that time, I felt robbed of that. It was part of the experience that I didn't get to have. It felt like my pregnancy was cut short. Everyone was telling me that I would be begging my doctors to induce me. And so I was mentally preparing to eventually be 42 weeks pregnant and miserable and twiddling my thumbs and waking up every day pissed off that I hadn't gone in labor, because that was what I had seen from all of the first-time moms around me. And I had just finished the last gig of my pregnancy. I was gearing up for a couple of weeks of nesting, which I had purposefully delayed so that I would have something to do in those final weeks to occupy my time and my mind instead of twiddling my thumbs waiting to go into labor. And I thought it was a really clever plan, and like I was beating the system, because I'd already planned for that contingency. And yes, I know, medically speaking, 37 weeks isn't that early, but with all of those expectations that we had in mind and what everyone had been preparing us for, and the fact that my pregnancy had been pretty healthy, the whole thing felt really early. And the people around me at the time too, who I felt comfortable opening up to about this, they were really fixated on getting me to the other side of it, and into a place of acceptance and excitement, that it didn't feel like I was entitled to a second just to sit in what I was feeling and catch my breath. Everything I was hearing was, you'll have your baby in your arms soon, and oh, isn't that so exciting? You're gonna have a baby before you know it, and oh, I'm so excited, there's gonna be a baby soon. And it just felt like no one really saw what was going on with me. I felt really unseen, really dismissed, really invalidated. So I had to do a lot of that work myself. I spent the rest of the day after this appointment moving from feeling totally defeated to just trying my best to be at peace with what was about to happen, because that was what I had to do. This was happening. I got a lot of well-meaning comments from the few friends and family members that I told what was going on, and I got a lot of comments about the power of a positive attitude, and that if they were me, they would just try to be grateful, which, although the intentions were good, honestly speaking, in that moment, it was probably the least helpful thing I could have heard. Has being told to feel differently than you do ever actually made you feel differently than you do? I don't know. Like, as a friend, I never try to tell someone else how to feel. But anyway, I did have one friend who had observed some of these comments in group texts and had been through something similar in her own birth experience. And she reached out to me on her own to just express her empathy over how hard it can be when the plans change so abruptly. And she reminded me that I'm resilient. She gave me the reassurance that I would be okay. And I was so grateful for that. I was also really grateful for my doula, who, again, she was one of the few people who really understood how I was feeling in that moment and just gave some space for that. But the majority of people that we told were more like, yay, a baby, that's so exciting, that's magical, aren't you so excited? And as much as I would have loved to have said yes, the truth was no, I wasn't excited. I was scared for my life, first of all. I didn't know what was about to happen in the labor room. I thought I was going to go into labor on my own, and now our expectations had to shift so drastically, and it was going to be medically managed. And we were totally caught off guard by that. We went home and we were frantically trying to get at least a bassinet and some diapers and a hospital bag together. We just hadn't even packed anything. So my doula came over to help me come up with my birth preferences given my unique circumstance. And I learned that Pitocin doesn't have to be the first route. She took the time to educate me about how long each induction medication takes to work its course in your body, how they work. She educated me about alternatives to magnesium for high blood pressure. And she was really instrumental in helping to move me to a place where I felt like I knew how to advocate for myself again and could begin to prepare for how things would be given our new circumstance. And honestly, I truly credit that information that I learned from my doula that day for the way that my labor unfolded. Another thing that was really helpful was when it became clear that this baby was coming really soon, my sister-in-law came over, and while I was trying to call my boss and tell him I wasn't going to be in anymore and have my doula over and talk through my birth plan and all of these things, my sister-in-law came over, and she was wonderful. She didn't really disturb us. She just loaded our dishwasher, unloaded our dishwasher, sorted baby clothes, helped me get a hospital bag together. And even though I was completely frazzled and could barely answer any questions she had for me, it was just strange to have someone in my house doing all my chores for me, but also really helpful to have that support and to have that help that I didn't even know that I needed at the time. And then some of my husband's family friends went to the baby store and picked up the crib for us, and we got that all together. And it was really just this day of frantically getting everything together when literally we had been planning to have like a fun, slow, luxurious kit nesting weekend with our family. And it turned into this frantic thing, but everyone really came together and pulled it together. And I was really grateful for all of that and the people that were there in the way that we needed. That's all for today, but stay tuned next time for part 2 of this series where I'll share my birth experience with my first son. I'm not gonna spill the beans. All I can say is it was very surprising, so stay tuned to hear more. If you like what you're hearing, feel free to follow, like, and share this podcast with anyone that you feel may benefit. We're on Instagram and Facebook at Our Village Circle, and our website is www.ourvillagecircle.com. Until next time, bye-bye.